stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am thrilled to bring you a new segment here at The Whisper in Darkness. This is a chance encounter, which is a conversation with some of the allies who can help you in your battles against the Mythos. And by allies, of course, I mean some of the other players who enjoy the Arkham Horror LCG. One of the greatest things about this game is the way it really brings people and ideas together. And I've certainly become a better player by reading strategy articles, listening to podcasts, and watching games recorded by other talented players. The goal of this segment is to highlight some of those players and their contributions to the Arkham Horror LCG community, and hopefully inspire you to check out some of those contributions for yourselves. My first guest is a player who's had a huge impact on my development as a player since the days of the core set. SgtMook's decks and his detailed strategies that accompany them over at Arkham DB have really changed the way that I approach the game, and they've inspired a few deck creations of my own. Those of you who have been following my channel for a while will remember that I took on the experiment from extracurricular activity with a variant of one of SgtMook's decks. And recently I've been totally blown away by the work that he has put into his latest series of Wendy decks, which are geared to tackle the Path to Carcosa solo and on expert difficulty, no less. So I was pretty stoked when SgtMook agreed to come on the show and talk about his decks with me today. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Hello, glad to be here.
So tell me a little bit about how you got into the Arkham Horror LCG.
Arkham Horror. Well, I actually started with the board game, not the old one, the big one with the whole map of Arkham that took forever and everything is far more chaotic than what we have now. But it was the Lovecraftian theme that got to me, you know.
Mm-hmm. Were you
Yep.
Were you a fan of Lovecraft's work before you picked up the game?
No, that was my first contact with Lovecraftian games or Lovecraft's work, and yeah, honestly, mechanically, the big board game wasn't very engaging, but the theme stuck with me. So I think that's how I got into the card game when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
I actually picked it up, I think, pretty close to the day it came out. And I think that was, late 2016?
Yeah.
Yeah, then been playing ever since.
So what is your favorite way to play the game? Do you play solo, multiplayer? What kind of level of difficulty?
Usually two players.
Two
and
players.
Usually on expert.
Usually on expert.
Yeah, we've played a lot of this game, and we've gotten to the point where we have a decent shot on expert. So it's got an air of legitimacy to it when it says, "I want Arkham Horror," that's what you get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, after playing a little bit of expert myself, I actually quite enjoyed it. It's quite a bit of a different game than on standard, where you can sort of play around the chaos bag a little bit. On expert, you don't really have that luxury as much.
I'll comment a bit on the balance though. Like in standard and maybe even up to hard, you're actually very rewarded for having a high base stat on something. Like Guardians are good at fighting, Mystics are good at casting spells, and Seekers are good at investigating. But in expert, even if you have, like, let's say Mark has 5 combat and you put a 45 automatic on him, now he has 6, and you're shooting at someone with 2 combats, you still have a pretty bad chance of hitting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
It's
true.
not the odds you want to be using if the enemy has retaliate. Yeah, it's a different game, but on the other hand, things that survivors have access to, like Lucky, like the Rabbit's Foot, like Will to Survive, suddenly become very powerful.
Mm-hmm. So do you think all investigators have what it takes to play on harder expert difficulty, or are some going to excel better than others?
No, I do not. In fact, I would say that I will be hard pressed to put anyone except Wendy through a solo expert rank.
Oh, really? So what is it about Wendy that makes her so good at that level?
Ah, so first, let me preface this by saying there is no right way to play the game, and the best investigator is the one you have the most fun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I am of the opinion that not only is Wendy the best solo investigator, I am of the opinion that if you add 5 XP to every other investigator at the start of the campaign, Wendy is still going to be the best investigator for solo on expert.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for several reasons. But I think when evaluating an investigator, we always start at looking at their stats. I think there was an article by Motex a while ago that went into detail about why evasion is so powerful in solo, so much more important most of the time than even combat. And when these stats are really well fit, if you consider that evasion is better than combat, because her dump stats, her stat that only has 1 in combat, and as a result, she has a high willpower, which makes her resistant to the encounter deck, and she has a decent intellect that lets her investigate if she has like 1 or 2 tools out, and her high agility lets her evade or use her evasion to kill a lot of the monsters pretty easily. So actually has like all her stats are more or less relevant. But I think what really pushes her up is her ability, which is, of course, you can discard the card to redraw a chaos token, and you can use this once for every ability or skill test. And recently, a stick card release called Time Warp, and I will quote from the Arkham DB FAQ entry for it. And it says, the fact of the matter is that 99% of the time, this card is going to be used in quite simple situations, like after failing an attack against a retaliator. Well, if you're just using it to redo a failed check, it's pretty much just like redrawing a token. And you consider that Time Warp is a 2 XP event that costs 1 resource, and one is pretty much doing it for free with whatever card she happens to have in hand. So you can see that her ability is actually worth quite a bit. And besides that, well, she has a good synergistic card pool between Rogue and Survivor, where Rogue is about taking as many actions as you can in a turn, and Survivor can really push what you can do with those actions through Will to Survive and Fight or Flight. And on the inverse side, Rogue is about making sure 1 or 2 very important pass with their double or nothing and their watch these and their quick thinking. And Survivor, in turn, makes you able to do that reliably with Will to Survive and with Fight or Flight.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, her amulets enables like completely new strategies. A lot of times, her amulet is gonna be committed just for 2 wild icons, and that's a better unexpected courage. And unexpected courage is a card I'm perfectly willing to put into my deck, so that's not bad. And sometimes it's gonna be a value engine. It's gonna sit on the table, and suddenly you're discarding an event to your ability or committing an event to your skill check, and you're not actually done a card because you can just play it from the discard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then once in a while, like in my curtain call strategy, it just enables wildly different strategy that's not going to work on anyone else.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my take on Wendy Adams.
Yeah. So it's safe to say that she's your favorite investigator.
Yeah.
Are there any others that you play with regularly?
Yeah. So the other one I found to work somewhat well on higher difficulties is Akachi, and that's because not only does she get extra charges, she can recycle assets with charges, and that means you can give her say a shriveling and a grotesque statue and you have a very good chance of succeeding even on higher difficulties by drawing 2 or more tokens on your combat deck. And you don't run out. You just play your Spirit Speaker and pick them back up and play them back. And so there is really the synergy with growth test that is pushes her up there.
Okay. So what do you think are some of the key differences between playing on standard difficulty versus hard or expert? You did mention that, even if you're 4 up on a test, you've still got a fairly good chance of yeah.
So first, avoid the chaos bag. The bag is bad for you. I mean, there's a difference between the difficulties. The bag gets worse. So if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to dip into the bag. Don't dip into the bag, and that means taking advantage of cards like working a hunch and drawn to the flame, like the testless damage and testless, right?
Yeah.
And also, when you are dipping into the bag, try to double dip into the bag, because when your chance of succeeding is like about 60%, which is pretty reasonable for a hard and expert, then drawing 2 tokens goes a long way. And that's of course with Wendy's ability and with grotesque stat.
So do you have a favorite scenario that you test your decks against?
No, I find that especially with Wendy, your deck will vary widely between scenario to scenario, thanks to 2 copies of adaptable that I always put up.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's a part of her strength, because the deck is worth a lot more XP than people might usually associate with. Like for instance, Echoes of the Past, in my expert solo Wendy playthrough on in Path to Carcosa, in Echoes of the Past, I found that there is actually 0 willpower deck. And the ability to switch my copies of Guts into something relevant, like you can think of it as adding 2 icons to an otherwise blank card, and that's probably worth more than 1 or 2 XP a lot of the time.
So how would you describe your approach to deck building for the game? Because I sort of see it as on standard difficulty, I think, for somebody who's starting out, they can basically throw, if they pick 30 good Seeker cards or Guardian cards, the deck will probably work out well for you. It may not be as optimized as it could be, but you'll be able to get through the scenario. But that's obviously a little bit different when you raise the difficulty.
Right. So the good stuff deck is definitely, I think, works a lot better in standard and easy than on harder difficulties. So my approach, and I think it shows very well on my combo 1D deck, which is my solo 1D deck for playing through Knight of the Zealot on hard, and it's a very top-down approach. At the very beginning of my guide for that deck, I mentioned we're going to kill Umordot in 1 turn, and this is how we're going to do it. And how we do it, of course, is with Will to Survive, Double or Nothing, and a bunch of pump cards. But that is how I build this deck. I come up with, okay, how are we going to win this campaign? And then we're adding the cards that make us directly win this campaign, like Will to Survive, like Backstab, and Double or Nothing. And then I think, okay, so if I get to the end where I'm face to face with the big bad, I can kill him. Now what? How do I get there? And how I get there usually is by adding such and such cards to help us survive, and such and such cards to deal with the specific challenges to this scenario. Like, usually the confrontation happens in the final scenarios, right? But you have to keep in mind how you intend to win the final scenario.
Yeah, that was the first deck that really caught my eye, and the one that really sort of opened my eyes to different approaches of playing the game, because I think when I tend to play, I prefer to just race the scenario as fast as I can, and so I tend not to draw many cards or take resources if I can help it, because I just want to advance the act deck as fast as I can and get to the end before I end up dead. But in that deck, you spend a lot more time drawing cards and basically just standing pat, preparing for what's coming up next, rather than racing.
Yeah, I think that's an unintuitive approach, and this is what I was talking about, right? An approach only available to Wendy Adams, because how she can recycle her event pretty much indefinitely.
So what motivated you to build that Wendy Adams deck for the Night of the Zealot campaign?
So this was earlier in this game's life, when there was, I think, that was back when there was the core set and maybe the first half of the Dunwich Legacy, and there was a prevailing opinion that Wendy Adams was not that good, and you can kind of see it, right? Like, the mythos is about fighting monsters, and of course the mythos turns out to not really be about fighting monsters after all. It's more about investigating and getting through the scenarios. But if you are looking to fight monsters, well, Wendy Adams seems like the worst choice you can make with her one combat. So I thought, okay, well, who is the biggest, baddest monster of them all? And at that time, it was Umordor. So, okay, let's take the weakest combat character and go kill Umordor in one turn, and we will do a relive. So that was the motivation behind it.
So was it more of a reverse engineering build that you were doing? You basically looked at Immordoth and said, how do I kill him, and then how do I get to that point?
Yeah, reverse engineering is the perfect way of putting it.
So are you looking forward to taking that deck for a spin through the Return to the Night of the Zealot when it's released?
Oh, that's interesting. That is a product I haven't given much thought to. I don't even know when that's coming out. But yeah, actually, I think I would play a deck like that. Probably not exactly like that, depending on the challenges in Return to the Night of the Zealot. Yeah, it will be interesting to see how it holds up.
So what do you think about that type of product revisiting an old campaign? It sort of reminded me of the Nightmare decks that they did for LOTR. Now I'm not sure if it's going to be quite that the same level of difficulty, but
You're at an advantage there, because I haven't actually played the LOTR LCG. But I would say I'm intrigued, though I prefer new content over revisiting old ones.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm honest, the revealed player cards didn't seem very interesting to me. Revealed cards were, what were they? There was a level 3 Rabbit's Foot, and also we know that we're going to get upgraded versions of the Hyper Awareness and Dig Deep and Fast Cycle of cards.
Yeah, I think each of the talents will probably get an upgrade.
Yeah, the talents, and it's a lot of rehashing what we've seen, which is kind of the point, right? Because it's turned to the core set. But ultimately, those are not interesting enough. I think is the way I want to put it.
Yeah.
Like something like the Forgotten Age, where even in the first product of the Forgotten Age, we're seeing some really wild cards like the new survivor Aulai Yalto. And I can talk all day about the synergy with Ash and Pete. That's like the one deck I want to try when I get to the Forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah. So how many games? So just moving on to the deck that you built for the solo Wendy campaign back to Carcosa and back. How many times did you have to play Curtain Call before you were able to beat it consistently?
The probably first 6 games were just complete failures. And I started with kind of a rush deck where I would play Look What I Found and flashlight and Gravedigger's shovel, and the idea is, okay, we are gonna have enough resources to kill the royal emissary once, maybe twice. And it turns out Wendy's just not fast enough. And actually, I tried this with Daisy too, and a Seeker wasn't even fast enough. Granted, she was like just massively slowed down. She even had to deal with rats. But yeah, even a Seeker isn't fast enough, and that's when I thought, okay, so maybe just rushing through the scenario isn't gonna work. Let's try something else.
Mm-hmm. So your first iteration of the deck was a rush deck. See, that would be where I would probably start as well, is just try to beat it as quickly as possible. But that Royal Emissary,
sense, right?
Yeah, the Royal Emissary
because,
returning is really really difficult to deal with.
Because a 4 combat 4 health enemy in the first scenario is actually just such a pain.
So you played the first 6 games, and those didn't go so well, and then how many do you think you played to sort of hone the because you're playing this one over, I know in the great strategy guide that you put together for it, that you say that you want to take 20 or 30 turns to beat that scenario. And I mean, when I play, I've been keeping track of the turn numbers, and I'm like turn 12 or something like that usually. So that's quite a difference. Yeah, that's quite a difference. Long time.
My test, and I ran like several tests. I ran 6 games with the deck I ended up publishing, and 5 out of those 6 games were wins with 7 XP, which was at which point I thought, okay, I'm happy with this. But yeah, each of those games took like an hour and a half, and I consider myself a pretty fast player, so that's saying something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, one of the things I find so fascinating about the decks that you've put together is that the amount of changes that you have to make from scenario to scenario. Like, for example, when you're playing like a combat heavy scenario like Curtain Call, in which you're planning to beat it over 20 to 30 rounds, and then you have to move to a scenario like The Last King where you're planning to beat it in 7 or 8.
Yeah, there's the massive pivot, right?
Yeah, the massive pivot.
And this is where I think adaptable really shows its power, that rogues, or like when a sub-rogue can change what you do from scenario to scenario, and that's especially important in solo, because you can't just say, okay, this is a combat scenario, Roland, go handle it, and okay, this is an investigation scenario, I'll have Rex do all the work. You're on your own, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, like, I think for The Last King, I end up putting in perception and elusive, like all of the cards that either gives you tempo or helps you without setting you back on tempo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is why I like adaptable. Like I probably pick up 2 copies after the first scenario of most games I play.
Yeah, I realized when I've been playing a Lola Hayes deck online, and I'm not very happy with the deck, but I realized too late, unfortunately, that she really needs 2 copies of adaptable to be able to make those kind of switches back and forth.
Yeah, I think Lola more than most, because especially I think Guardians and Mystics have a defined role. Like, you're not going to play Guardian without like your machetes and your 45 autos. Actually, some people have been replacing 45 autos with like survival knives or similar cards, but like there's gonna be a package you're gonna stick with. Whereas for Lola, and I think to a lesser extent for Wendy, it's going to be every card has a purpose, and if that purpose just isn't for this scenario, then yeah, take it out, cut it.
So and then you've got to, again, when you move on to Echoes of the Past, you've got to basically switch back to the Curtain Call strategy. What sort of thought process do you go through to make those changes, considering you've really only got the 4 cards that you can switch from adaptable, and then any that you can buy with experience?
So Curtain Call and Echoes of the Past are unique in that the clock can always keep ticking. Like there isn't a certain amount of doom that you can accumulate and then it's over no matter what you've done. It's like you can freeze the scenario. You can make this scenario go on, and that's why, like you said, they share the same strategy, which is why I swapped in kind of a similar package. I mean, I used Fire Act for Echoes of the Past, I believe, because it's specifically good against Acolytes. But if we're talking about Curtain Call versus Echoes of the Past, yeah, it's that similarity. That makes it easy to say, okay, well, this worked for Curtain Call, let's try this for Echoes of the Past. And it helps that Echoes of the Past is really one of the easiest scenarios in the Path to Carcosa.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if the agenda deck, the encounter deck doesn't actually add that much pressure to your health and sanity.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you fail, right? Even if you fail and you just resign, well, that's not that bad. It's not counted as a defeat, notably because we are using Charon's Elbow, and a defeat pretty much means you're dead.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a low risk, high reward scenario. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I've played it both solo and I played a 4-player variant, and I thought it was going to be a little bit harder because of the amount of pressure that you get having to start with so many cultists on the table at the same time.
Yeah,
but
interestingly, in Echoes of the Past, the skull is, or on hard and expert anyway, the skull is a minor act, where act is the total amount of Dumo and play. And in 2, 3, or even 4 players, we can easily see this being like 5 or more, right? And -5 is kind of the bad threshold on hard and expert.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, in solo play, it's very often 1 or 0. So you, in like hard or expert, suddenly you have you have 3 copies of -1 or -0s in the bag, and that feels pretty good.
Mm-hmm. So are you planning several scenarios in advance as you change cards, or do you just simply have to build for that specific scenario and then try to make the changes as you move on to the next one?
It's the latter. Yeah, I really, that's what the card says, right? Be adaptable, and you adapt to your current scenario, and you adapt to the next one after that when you get there. Yeah, I think it's just too hard to see enough scenarios ahead to make a meaningful decision at every point, like to say, okay, well, but I'm gonna need these cards for 2 scenarios after, so I better play it now. And usually, you know what, 4 cards is a lot of cards out of like 30 card stack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Although I would say that I have a plan for Haster when I get to it. And I probably shouldn't have said that when I did the conviction route. But yeah, I do have a plan for the final scenario when I come to it, and that is something I will plan 1 or 2 scenarios ahead for.
Mm-hmm.
And the plan is very simply going.
Mm-hmm.
It worked for Umerdorf.
Yeah, exactly. He's got a health pool that you can take down.
So I will note as an aside that the one thing I maybe didn't agree with the design of Arkham Horror is that the ancient ones, like Yog-Sothoth, like Haster, blessed be his name, have a health pool. Why do they have a health pool? That means I can kill them.
Yeah.
Why can't I kill an ancient one?
Yeah. Exactly.
Like it's like the thing on MMORPGs, right? You give something a health pool, and players are going to find a way to kill it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's within the spirit of like cosmic horror to say, oh, here is Yog-Sothoth and he has health, and it's like not like 10,000 health or something. It's like a reasonably low amount of health that you can, with some concentrated effort, just go kill him. Like Umerdorf and Idatkwa, fine. Like they are kind of, I guess, lesser ancient ones. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure, you can kill them, but Yog-Sothoth, come on.
Yeah, well, I almost in my playthrough of Dim Carcosa, I nearly took out Haster with a machete. So
There you go.
I was just like, well, this is a little weird. Maybe I should have brought a lightning gun or something. But the machete was doing a pretty good job. So you recently did update the version of the Wendy deck for the Pallid Mask. When do you expect to complete the series?
I'm actually a bit sidetracked. So my solo playthrough is a side project. Like I mentioned, I usually play 2 players, and when my playing partner is either unavailable or kind of play through all of the scenarios in like when we're waiting for a new product to come out, as was the case with the Forgotten Age. That's when I'm working on them. So I've been a bit sidetracked recently with the release of the Forgotten Age. But I expect to get back to it reasonably soon, probably within a month.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned in the strategy guide for the Pallid Mask that basically at this point the deck has most of its key upgrades in place. What do you think are going to be some of the significant stumbling blocks ahead in the final 2 scenarios?
So Black Star's Rise is the one I haven't given much thought to, because that's like the penultimate scenario. That's not the big boss at the end. But for Dim Carcosa, I think that the amount of horror that you end up gathering and the encounter cards that interact with those horror is going to be a pretty big point. To the point that I'm planning to rather remove the cat burglars I spent XP on and putting in Peter Sylvester level 2 dead.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what was that card in Dim Carcosa that says discards cards from play and or from hand that playing cost equal to...
The World's Edge or something like that. I can't remember the name, but yeah, I do remember it.
But my point is there are some cards that so punishing if you have a high amount of horror on you, and possession cards.
Mm-hmm.
That's well, one, keeping horror low is one way to go around it, but also putting in like a test of will. Like a test of will is probably going to be my first purchase going in Carcosa.
Yeah,
and it was
sure.
Realm of Madness, because of course it's...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So what have you learned anything from doing this side project? Has it made you a better player?
Well, I think just by playing the game more, it will make you a better player. But yes, this because it's a different ballgame from playing 2 players, right? There's no one there to bail you out. Like if you draw an enemy while you're unprepared, in 2 players, a very frequently seen like play pattern is, okay, you have an enemy on. Well, I'm gonna take my turn. My last action, I will engage that enemy off you. Now you can take your turn. And yeah, sure, you're taking an attack on the enemy phase from that enemy, but like you can still play the game, right? Whereas in solo, it's you're ready or you're pretty much dead. Like you draw an enemy you can't handle, you are very often going to get dead.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that seems to happen. And I know when I first started playing Curtain Call, and you draw those first couple enemies, and you're just... There's really very little.
Not to mention the poltergeist.
Yeah, the poltergeist.
Oh, there's the poltergeist. Such a pain.
There's so little that you can do unless you're prepared for it, that the game is basically over before it even starts.
Yeah, and yeah, some people are going to say, like, people are probably rightfully going to complain that is too high variance, that is too RNG based. Like, it's anti-fun to have a game that's over, like you said, before it really began. But on the flip side, I do enjoy the challenge and say, okay, well, I drew an enemy. How do I deal with it? Like, even if I'm unprepared, how can I at least evade it or something to make sure I can keep playing the game? Like, it's actually very thematic for a survivor to be able to do that, Kind of the survivor should take, like, ready for anything.
Yeah.
You can't keep playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more used to it just because I did play the Lord of the Rings where that can happen a lot more, where you start a scenario and within a couple
You
turns
know,
you're dead.
you know
And
the
so it's
description about the Lord of the Ring LCG is sometimes you would open up a scenario, you will set it up, and then you would decide, okay, let's try that again.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I recently played it for the first time in a little while, and I was like, yeah, this is very familiar. I would set up a scenario, play it. I'd be okay. Well, I'm done. It's turn two. Let's try this again. And but when I played expert on Arkham Horror, it did feel a little bit more like Lord of the Rings in that respect, where the like to get a good game, sometimes you die really quickly, but I found once you sort of got into it, it would be a lot more rewarding, it felt like, than playing on standard, where sometimes it feels a little bit too easy. What sort of advice would you give a player who's thinking about taking the next step up and maybe moving from standard up to hard or expert?
Well, don't do what I did. Play an investigator that works. Like, like I said before, Wendy is my favorite investigator, and a part is her mechanical depth that drew me in. But that's why we have 5 different classes of investigators. Some investigators are going to work for some people, some investigators are going to work for other people, and at the end of the day, you got to play with the investigators you want to play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't go with Wendy Adams because someone posted a guide on Arkham TV that says, hey, Wendy Adams can go through expert on Path to Carcosa. Like, try to make your investigator work. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but you're going to have a lot more fun doing it than following someone else's deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So what are your impressions of some of the Survivor cards in the Forgotten Age? Are there any in there that are going to make the cut in your Wendy deck?
I've been considering improvised weapon. So one is an event that really works with Wendy's discard ability because you can natively play it from your discard pile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just for context, improvised weapon is a 1 resource cost event, and it has tactic improvised traits. And it says you may play improvised weapon from your discard pile. If you do, shuffle in your deck after resolving its effect, and fight. The attacked enemy gets -1 fight for its attack. If you played improvised weapon from your discard pile, the attack deals +1 damage. So there are several parts of this that works with Wendy. One is it's an event that helps you fight, and Wendy is always going to be short on that. Like, backstab is pretty much the only level 0 event that does sort of the same thing. And you can play it from your discard pile, which is naturally synergistic with Wendy's redraw ability. And finally, it shuffles your deck. Important for Wendy, especially when playing solo, because you end up with your best events on the bottom of your deck after playing them with Wendy's amulets, and shuffle go a long way. That's the case.
Oh yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point.
There is also Dumb Luck. That is an interesting one. I'm not sure you make the cut, but there are very interesting things you can do. For instance, in Curtain Call, you can actually use Dumb Luck to pick up a Fanatic, so you can draw him next turn. You don't get a clue off of him, but when you draw him next turn, you can put him at another location, preferably a victory location, with a clue, and then he's going to suck up that clue for you, and you're going to, have that XP available for your next scenario. And that works in Curtain Call in particular because you have more clues than you need to advance.
Oh yeah, no, that's I was when I've looked at the Survivor cards in the Forgotten Age, Dumb Luck was one that I looked at, and I'm just like, I'm not entirely sure what to do with this thing. It I mean, at least in solo, it seems like, okay, well, you're gonna face that enemy the very next turn anyway, so you're sort of, it's not getting rid of it like a close call would or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's one of those cards I'd like to experiment with, but no, I don't think it's going to make the cut.
So who do you partner Wendy with when you're playing
I'm
two
playing two
player?
players. Usually Daisy.
Hmm.
Well, that that's going to throw most people off because well, we have the least fighting character out of the entire game. So who do we pair her with? Well, let's pair her with the second least fighting character in the entire game.
Yeah.
But uh, Wendy fights better than most Guardians on two players on experts, just because she doesn't have to dig into that chaos bag when she's fighting. And
Hmm.
also, she lets you do things like will to survive, double or nothing, backstab, throwing, um, quick thinking, and watch these. Like those ridiculous combos are made so much more consistent. Um, Daisy as her backup because of her old book of lore and because of her encyclopedia and her uh, cryptic research that lets you draw a lot of cards, or no stone unturned, especially the upgraded no stone unturned that lets you find literally any card in your deck.
Hmm.
She also her old book of lore also helps Wendy shuffle her deck, and that just puts all of her already used events back into the deck that you can draw. So that's also a powerful.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. I've, as I mentioned in the intro, that I've been really blown away by the decks that you've posted on Arkham DB, and as well as the strategy guides. I think that that type of resource is just so valuable for players. Even if you're not planning to play on expert or hard, it's nice to read those strategies and see sort of where your thought process was, and what maybe incorporate some of those tricks in your
Yeah,
lower decks.
while I've definitely posted them as a guide, my intention is more to inspire than walk people through the scenario. Like I said, don't play like I did, play in a way that works for you. Um, and yeah, I'm glad that it did show people that hey, maybe this card can work with this card. And that's that's at the end what a deck builder is about.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, just thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very
Been
much for
great
coming.
talking.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on. That's going to do it for me today. If you enjoyed this content, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.